So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Miles. I'm the Dean of the Law School. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Ulysses S. and Margaret S. Schwartz Lecture. The Schwartz Lecture was established in 1974 to bring to the law school distinguished lawyers and leaders with experience in the academy, in practice, and in public service so that they could share with the law school community and the wider university community their ideas and perspectives. Now, Judge Ulysses Schwartz was a longtime supporter of the university and specifically the law school. He began his legal career as a special assistant city prosecutor in Chicago in 1910. He served on several courts in Illinois, including a long service on the Illinois Supreme Court. Judge Schwartz's son, John, received his JD from the law school, and he too became a judge, serving as a federal district bankruptcy court judge, including 12 years as chief judge of the bankruptcy court. So since its establishment, the Schwartz Lecture has had a very distinguished history. Past Schwartz lecturers include Stephen Breyer, Douglas Ginsburg, Nadine Strawson, Lonnie Guinier, and most recently, Justice Michael Kirby of Australia. Now, at the University of Chicago, one of the distinctive features of our study of law is that we often take an interdisciplinary approach, and I'm pleased that we're doing that today as well. Today's Schwartz Lecture is co-sponsored by the University of Chicago's Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality. And as we begin our program today, I have two tasks. So the first is to remind you all that immediately following today's event, there'll be a reception out in the breezeway, so please join us after the event there. And my second task is to introduce Professor Emily Buss, who in turn will introduce today's speaker. Professor Emily Buss is the Mark and Barbara Freed Professor of Law. Professor Buss received both her undergraduate and law degree from Yale. She clerked for Judge Lewis Pollack of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and then for Justice Harry Blackmun of the U.S. Supreme Court. She practiced law for several years, including serving as Deputy Director of the Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia. Professor Buss is, of course, as all of us in the law school know, a much admired teacher in a variety of subjects, most prominently family law, civil procedure, and evidence. She's written extensively in the area of children's and parents' rights and the legal system's allocation of the responsibilities for children's development among parents, children, and the state. Please join me in welcoming Professor Emily Buss.
Thank you, Tom. It's my distinct pleasure to say a few words in introduction of our distinguished speaker, Cecile Richards, who has generously agreed to respond to your questions after she delivers her lecture. Cecile Richards is a lifelong advocate for social justice. The daughter of two parents involved in the labor and civil rights movements, one of whom, her mother, became governor of Texas, Ms. Richards' life's work started at the kitchen table. In junior high, she wore a black armband in protest of the Vietnam War, which got her sent to the principal's office. The attention her silent political act received awakened in her the power of protest, and a power she has wielded throughout her career with intelligence, courage, and grace. There are many lessons we can learn from a study of Ms. Richards' career, but one of special value to those who aspire to follow in her footsteps is that she developed her career one footstep at a time, looking for opportunities to use her talents and to have an impact, and changing direction in response to her developing talents and a sense of the country's needs. She began her career as a labor organizer, organizing low-wage workers in the hotel, healthcare, and janitorial industries in California, Louisiana, and Texas. In 1995, she founded Texas Freedom Network, aimed at countering the religious right through advocacy of religious freedom and individual liberties. In 2002, she began working for then Minority Whip, soon to become Minority Leader of the House, Representative Nancy Pelosi, as her Deputy Chief of Staff. Ms. Richards was also co-founder and president of American Votes, a coalition of grassroots organizations working to expand ballot access and protect every American's right to vote. In 2006, Ms. Richards assumed the presidency of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund, organizations that have long worked to build a healthier world for women and teens. In assuming leadership of the organization, Ms. Richards candidly announced that Planned Parenthood was, in her words, going to become more political so that the health care for women can become less politicized. Under Ms. Richards' leadership, Planned Parenthood played a central role in shaping health care coverage and services for women under the Affordable Care Act. And in 2011, Ms. Richards led a nationwide campaign to preserve access to Planned Parenthood's preventive care through federal programs. Ms. Richards is the recipient of an impressive list of awards and prizes, among them an honorary degree from Brown University, a place on Time Magazine's 2012 list of the world's 100 most influential people, and in 2010, the Puffin Nation Prize for Creative Citizenship, an annual award given to an individual who has challenged the status quo through distinctive, courageous, imaginative, and socially responsible work of significance. We are especially privileged to have the opportunity to hear Ms. Richards' thoughts today as we anticipate the upcoming change in administration. As students and teachers of law, we are accustomed to looking backwards to learn from our social, political, and doctrinal history. And for those involved in legal practice, we have experience responding with an array of approaches to problems pressing us today. But it takes a rare person with exceptional wisdom, judgment, and experience to look ahead and to consider how to prepare to respond to changes whose nature, scope, and mechanisms are not yet known. It is a special honor to introduce one such exceptional individual to talk to you about the future of reproductive rights, Ms. Cecile Richards.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Buss. I want to thank the Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality for hosting me on campus and for an incredible conversation we had with students earlier today. Thank you to Jeff Stone and everyone at the University of Chicago Law School for inviting me to be part of this incredibly distinguished Schwartz Memorial Lecture Series. I read about all the other folks who have come and spoken here, and you've hosted some pretty amazing people, legal scholars from around the globe and Supreme Court justices from across the ideological spectrum, discussing everything from the Second Amendment to human rights in North Korea. And for me, it's really rare that I get the opportunity to speak somewhere, a venue where the future of reproductive rights in America is one of the less controversial topics that you've actually covered. So I wanted to jump at the chance. But to be honest, I had hoped to be giving a different lecture this afternoon. Last month, Planned Parenthood turned 100 years old, and which is an extraordinary achievement in and of itself. Thank you. But as we stand on the verge of our second century, I was hoping to be able to tell you that America was entering a new era for reproductive rights and healthcare access that was defined by possibility and progress. But instead, millions of Americans are still reeling from the presidential election, where we elected a candidate who has pledged, among other things, to defund Planned Parenthood and to overturn Roe versus Wade. And I think even as profoundly, it was a campaign in which issues of sexual assault and harassment were dismissed in many ways as just the way things are. But even now, when it feels like the rug has somewhat been pulled out from underneath us, and when the future of reproductive rights in America is, frankly, as fragile and less certain as any time in my lifetime, there are some signs of hope. And in every corner of our country, people are getting up every morning and getting out of bed, even if it's hard, and living their lives, which for many of us feels like now a radical act of defiance. And the students that I met today, I think, so inspiring about their ideas for the future. And I will say that the morning after the election, folks, clinicians, and doctors all across this country at Planned Parenthood health centers showed up for work, and opened our doors to provide quality, affordable health care to the millions of folks who count on us every year, including folks here at LaSalle in downtown Chicago. The hopeful news, I think, is, as Tony Kushner wrote in Angels in America, the world only spins forward. And so our first 100 years of Planned Parenthood are living proof, and nothing and no one can stop the future from coming. Every now and then, as I travel the country for Planned Parenthood, I run into someone who tells me that they wish they could go back and wish they could experience the civil rights movement or the women's movement or the suffrage movement, the American Revolution, moments that, when, to borrow a line from the musical Hamilton, we were fighting for our soul as a nation. Well, look around. We actually are living at one of those times. We are at a crossroads in America. And what we do in the days and the months and the years to come won't just determine what happens next, it will define who we are and what we believe. And so I think the question largely is, are we going to fight for, so that our children and grandchildren have the autonomy to determine their own lives and futures, no matter their gender, no matter what they look like, who they are, who they love, where they live, or how much money they make? Or are we going to allow the circle of opportunity in this country to shrink back? So it's never been more important, I think, to stand up and to fight for reproductive rights and fight for the future of our country. And that's what we're about doing. Now, it's true that the stakes are higher now, then our work will be even harder. But take it from somebody who grew up in Texas. I don't know if I have any fellow Texans here. All right, well, you know, it's not exactly on the cutting edge of progress in America. And we know that anything worth having is worth fighting for. And that's what we do. And that, I think, has been the lesson about Planned Parenthood, frankly, ever since we began a century ago by a young nurse named Margaret Sanger. So back then, the two most common reasons that women of childbearing age died were tuberculosis or complications from pregnancy. Margaret saw her own mother die after a lifetime of pregnancy and childbirth, 11 children and 7 miscarriages. Her experience inspired her to declare that no woman can call herself free who does not own and control her own body. And so in October 1916, along with her sister Ethel and a volunteer named Fania Mendel, Margaret opened the very first birth control clinic in America in a tiny storefront in Brooklyn. And at that time, you could get a pamphlet for 10 cents a piece about how to prevent another pregnancy. Information that was completely illegal at the time and would remain so for another 50 years. And the interesting thing is, from the very first day, even though women were risking arrest, they lined up down the block. As you see, women pushing baby strollers, carrying babies in their arms, desperate to find out how to prevent pregnancy. So 10 days later, an undercover cop came in, posing as a mother, busted Margaret, threw her in jail, where Margaret taught all of her fellow inmates about birth control. And that was how the movement was born. And it spread like wildfire across the country. I was just recently back home in Texas, in Dallas, outside the Ripley shirt factory, where Katie Ripley, with the full approval and understanding of her husband, George Ripley, would send empty shirt boxes to New York City, where women would fill them with diaphragms, mark them return, and send them back to Dallas. And that was the way that women in Dallas got the most early and really not that great form of birth control. And that organization has grown into now an organization that serves tens of thousands of people in the state of Texas and North Texas. Here in Chicago, actually, there was a group of society women, as they call them, who were inspired to open up their own free birth control clinic on Michigan Avenue. And when the county health commissioner refused to give them a license, they took them to court and they won. And that is now Planned Parenthood of Illinois. And so the story of Planned Parenthood over the last century and the fight for reproductive rights is the story of brave women and a few good men risking their safety. There always have been. But folks who risked their safety and their reputations and went to jail to change women's lives. And they did. And Planned Parenthood has grown from that first storefront, as you see, in Brooklyn to nearly 650 health centers across the United States of America. We work in 12 countries around the globe, providing care and education, and we're proud to be the largest sex educator in the United States of America. 1 in 5 women in this country have been to Planned Parenthood for health care at some point in their lifetime. And they come to us for all kinds of health care. They come to us for birth control, for breast exams, for cancer screenings, for well women visits, and for abortion. And today, abortion is not only common, it is 1 in 3 women in this country have had an abortion. It's one of the safest medical procedures in America. And as for birth control, we've made some progress from the diaphragm. There's now actually 18 different kinds of birth control, and we provide them all. There's longer-acting methods that are more effective than birth control pills. And in fact, I was just at a medical conference in Denver where our medical committee approved making Depo-Provera, which is a shot, a birth control shot that's effective for 6 months, make it available for home use. So I feel like we're radically changing through medical technology the opportunities for birth control access. And then, of course, because of the invention of the interweb, we now have all kinds of ways for people to get information that they couldn't possibly get back in the early days. Planned Parenthood Online, through all our various web properties, provides the exact same information, well, not really exact same information that Margaret provided. I hope it's better. It's in English and in Spanish, and we provide it to 6 million visitors a month online, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And I think largely as a result of better access to birth control, better access to information and services, we are now at an all-time low for teenage pregnancy in the United States of America and a 30-year low for unintended pregnancy. And that's huge. And I think it's important to note there that it's not because people quit having sex. The fact is and that's really interesting because it's just what we're finding, particularly with teens, is they are simply getting better information and more access to birth control, or they're delaying sex because they have better information about the consequences. And best of all, I think access to reproductive health care and education has opened up a whole new world for women in this country. And in fact, back in the day, women on average died 30 years earlier than they do today in the United States of America. Today, the number of women in college has grown 5 times what it was before birth control was legal. Women are now half of the undergraduate students in the United States of America, half of the law school students. Let's hear it for that, which is amazing, fantastic. Half the medical students. Women earn the majority of master's degrees and doctoral degrees in the United States. And one study found that the birth control pill, let's hear it for those degrees. All right, yeah. And women have started earning more. In fact, one study out of I believe it was the University of Michigan, found that the pill was responsible for 1/3 of the wage gains made by women since the 1960s. Women are breadwinners in half of American households. We're business owners, we're CEOs and doctors and teachers and scientists, senators and mothers. And I truly believe that in our lifetime, a woman will be elected President of the United States of America sometime. So all of this was made possible, and now for your generation, the thought that pregnancy alone would determine your opportunities or your education or your career is really unthinkable, as it should be. But of course, we're not satisfied and far from it, and there's a lot of work to do. And we know that the progress we have made is uneven. Politics keeps a lot of kids still from getting sex education in the United States, including my home state of Texas. Access to birth control, access to safe and legal abortion really varies depending on your income or your zip code, and dramatically different. And so in our second century, Planned Parenthood is doubling down on equity, because that to me is really what our mission is to make sure that every person, regardless of where they live or their situation, has the opportunity to get ahead. So we're doubling down on a commitment to building a future where access to health care, and particularly sexual and reproductive health care, is a reality for everyone. And we aren't going to let anything, including a hostile administration to women's health, get us off course. we're going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And that means we're going to have to fight back against the attacks while also continuing to innovate and drive forward. And so while we're going to have to fight to defend the gains that we have made, we're using every opportunity to leap ahead. Because there are some advances in the world that even politics can't reverse. And on that front, one of my favorites is technology. It gives us an opportunity to reach more people in new ways than ever before. For starters, folks can now book an appointment at Planned Parenthood on your mobile phone 24/7, like at midnight, when birth control can just kind of be on your mind, but maybe the office is closed. We book more than 1 million appointments a year this way. We're also piloting birth control online, which is really exciting, which means you don't have to travel to a health center to actually get access to family planning services. One of our first patients was a woman in an Alaskan village in the Arctic Circle, and she lived 500 miles away from the closest health center. So she video conferenced with a Planned Parenthood clinician in Seattle, Washington, and a few days later, her birth control was dropped onto the glacier by a float plane, okay? That, to me, is the future. And politics can't stop that. And it's not just, there are tons of examples, I feel like, that we are really, literally putting in the hands of people on their cell phone the information and services that they need to live their lives. Access to abortion is another issue, and as you know, you may not know, but 87% of counties in America do not have an abortion provider. And it's a real problem for women in rural America. But now, thanks to telemedicine, we can actually connect women in rural areas in Montana and Idaho in particular with doctors by video conference, where they can then prescribe medication abortion and then have the local clinicians assist in the follow-up. It's revolutionary. It is absolutely going to change access to early abortion, not only in the United States of America, but around the world. And so the bottom line is this, to me: no matter what the opponents of women's health care throw at us, we're going to use technology by any means necessary to get people the health care and services that they deserve and that they need. Now, the good news, too, is that the majority of the United States of America are with us, and they just don't give up that easily. People today, especially young people, have come to take access to birth control and legal abortion and information for granted. And when someone tries to take it away, they rise up. And that's what we saw in my home state of Texas. So some of you may remember that politics, well, a few years ago, we saw such an inflection point. You know, the state of Texas has been putting politics ahead of women's health care for a long, long time, but in the last 5 years, it's gotten really bad. Now, first, this is not when my mother was governor, this is the next governor, okay? First, the governor and the legislature, they shut down the women's health care program in the state of Texas. And the whole reason they did that is they wanted to get Planned Parenthood out of the state. But of course, what happened was dozens of women's health care centers shut down. Most of them were not Planned Parenthood. And these were folks that were providing basic preventive health care, cancer screenings, birth control, well woman care to the most underserved Texans. And then after they did that and slashed the family planning program, the state legislature introduced the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. And for folks in Texas, it was the last straw. The state erupted. And day after day after day, hundreds of people drove to Austin, Texas to be in the Capitol. And they stayed till 2 and 3 in the morning to testify against these bills, just for the chance to get their 3 minutes in on the record. Students who carpooled from college campuses all across the state, and moms who left their kids with their neighbors or with their moms to come to Austin. And then, of course, my friend, State Senator Wendy Davis, made her historic 11-hour filibuster. And the Capitol was overflowing with thousands of activists, and folks wouldn't leave. There were so many people that were inspiring. One of my favorites was a young elementary school kid named Bo Guidry, who was there with his mom. They sat in the Senate gallery for the entire 11-hour filibuster, and he live tweeted the entire thing. And my favorite tweet from Bo was, I thought I would be spending my summer at Six Flags. Who knew I would be changing the world? It was the most amazing outpouring of people we have ever seen. And I talked to senators there who'd been in the Senate for decades. They'd never seen anything like it, young and old. On the last day at the Capitol, walking up the steps through the crowd, I passed a mother there with her son. He was probably about 12 years old. And she elbowed him, and she said, "Show her your sign." And he held up a giant piece of orange poster board, and he'd written on it in magic marker, "I still have my mom, thanks to cancer screenings at Planned Parenthood." And his mom started to cry and said simply, "Thank you." And that young man, really still just a boy, was standing up for his mother's right. And that's why we fight. She's who we fight for. And so while we didn't have the votes to win, and that was the crazy thing, people kept coming even though they knew there was no way we could beat the legislature. We did delay the bill, and we drew attention to what was happening in the state of Texas. And now a whole new generation of activists have been born, and I see them everywhere. There's probably some of them in law school here. It's absolutely amazing. Politicians in the state thought they could shut us down, but folks in Texas never gave up. And their resilience energized a whole movement that swept across the country. Women told their stories of having, once these bills were enacted, of having to drive hundreds of miles to access care. Women on the Rio Grande border with Mexico wrote publicly about going across the border and buying pills over the counter at pharmacies in Matamoros in order to terminate their pregnancy without medical care. Researchers at the University of Texas documented how women had to drive on average 4 times as far to access safe and legal abortion and had to spend hundreds of dollars more on overnight stays and child care and missed work. And 3 years later, this spring, in the face of overwhelming evidence that these laws harmed women's health, in a case brilliantly argued by a young lawyer, Stephanie Toti, and the Center for Reproductive Rights, the Supreme Court of the United States declared these laws were unconstitutional and an undue burden, and made history. And I will never, I will never forget sitting in the Supreme Court that day. I was so honored to be there for the oral argument. And for the first time, having 3 women on the Supreme Court talking about a case that was all about women. It was historic. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor. I just love to say their names. They are amazing women. And because they brought women's voices and lived experiences into the courtroom in a way that had never happened before. And that's why equal representation matters and is worth fighting for. And already we have seen a domino effect from this case. Anti-women's health restrictions in 9 more states have been blocked by courts across the country. And that, to me, is what never giving up looks like. And that's what we have to learn from. And so even at this trying time for reproductive rights, it's no longer at the margins of American politics. It's now in the mainstream, where it should be. Some of what happened during the past year, I think, demonstrates this. For example, this is the first time in the history of the United States that a presidential candidate, nominee of her party, pledged from the debate stage in front of millions and millions of audience viewers her unequivocal support for Planned Parenthood and for Roe versus Wade and the ability of women to make their own decisions about their pregnancies. It had never happened before. And in fact, it was one of the most important moments in that third debate. In fact, for the first time in this election that I can remember, the only candidates who are running television ads about the topic of Planned Parenthood and reproductive rights were on our side, because it is a winning issue. And meanwhile, candidates who had a history of trying to block access to care were busy trying to look like they were actually supporters of reproductive health care access, even though they had voted repeatedly to try to defund Planned Parenthood and end access to the family planning program. In fact, one United States senator, actually now ex-United States senator, was actually handing out condoms on college campuses just to try to look like she cared about reproductive health care. It takes a lot more than that to provide health care to folks in America. And I think it's no mystery why. It is because the American people believe in reproductive rights and they believe in access to health care. They don't want to see a century of progress ripped away, and they want us to move forward. And in fact, according to a poll by Politico and in the New England Journal of Medicine, nearly half of Donald Trump's supporters support access to Planned Parenthood, federal funding for Planned Parenthood. That's unheard of. And we're going to do every single thing we can to make sure that the incoming administration hears from the majority of Americans who support our work and our vision for the future. We're going to use every single tool we have in our arsenal to adapt and to fight in the court and to fight in legislatures and in Congress. Planned Parenthood lawyers are already in a record number of courtrooms defending reproductive access. And so for all the lawyers and future lawyers here today, take note, we need you more than ever. It is full employment time in the reproductive rights arena. And yes, we're going to leverage our massive base of supporters in America, 9 million strong and counting. And if you want to just do a comparative math, that's 1.5 times the membership of the National Rifle Association. You can clap for that, actually. But it's brutal out there. And so I don't want to gloss over how challenging these next few years are going to be. People are frustrated and they are fed up. But for the American people, Planned Parenthood is the solution, not the problem. Wherever I go, someone pulls me aside to tell me their story. In fact, someone told me their story today here on campus about how Planned Parenthood changed their life and often how Planned Parenthood saved their life. And they want to thank Planned Parenthood for having been there for them at a time of incredible need, or maybe a fork in the road where they needed the support and they needed the care. They tell me about their abortions, or they tell me about the time they didn't have health care coverage and insurance and they needed basic access to care. They tell me about the clinicians they met who held their hands, and doctors who answered questions that they didn't even know how to ask. And so that's our commitment. This is something that's happened over and over again since I came to work at Planned Parenthood. But now the other interesting thing to me is that people are pulling me aside, not so much to whisper their stories as they used to, but to say them out loud. Women are now shouting their abortion stories, as they say, taking on shame and taking on stigma and taking on the status quo. Like Amelia, the young woman I met in St. Louis who told me this year for the first time, she shared her story publicly, and it was really important to her, and it was important that other women did as well. It's interesting, in the last few days, or actually I'd say the last 3 weeks, our text chat line has exploded, bombarded, not just the usual questions of like, how do I use a condom, or do you think I might be pregnant, which unfortunately the answer is usually yes. But with messages like this from a 14-year-old girl in Philadelphia. She wrote, "I'm wondering where to go with the current election results. My rights are in jeopardy all across the board, and I'm scared." And so we're going to continue to be there for folks like Amelia and other people like her. The day after the election, we saw a 900% increase in calls to make appointments for IUDs at Planned Parenthood. 900%. And that's because folks are concerned that with the pledge to end the Affordable Care Act and the no copay birth control benefit that now 55 million women in America have, women knew that they could count on Planned Parenthood and that we had their backs. And that's why in the last few weeks, more than 260,000 people have donated to Planned Parenthood in $5 and $10. I think 70,000 have made a pledge or made a donation in honor of Mike Pence. I mean, and we didn't even organize it. And they've done the things they do. They've stopped by health centers and brought brownies and cookies and hugged and thanked Planned Parenthood staff and volunteers. So if there's ever any doubt to me as to whether or not people are ready and willing to stand with us, everything we've seen recently has given us our answer. Over the last 16 months and some of the worst political attacks Planned Parenthood has ever faced, we didn't lose support. In fact, we grew. We added more than 500,000 new supporters, and a ton of them are young people. Which brings me to my final point. If you want to see the future of reproductive rights, all you have to do is look around you here on this campus and in this room. The next generation is the largest, It is the most diverse in our country. And 4 million young people, 4 million plus, turn 18 every single year. And they've seen the progress that we fought for become a reality in their lives, and they have no interest in turning back now. They're demanding more. They're calling on us all to keep fighting for the way things ought to be. They believe in civil rights, and they believe in immigrant rights, and LGBT rights, and reproductive rights, and workers' rights, and voting rights, and racial justice, and they know that global warming is real and serious, and we better do something about it pretty soon. And they've grown up in a world where the things we stand for are guaranteed and the future is theirs to shape. Where access to health care, it is a fundamental right. It is not a privilege. It is a right, period. They are the future. And that's what actually fills me with hope. Planned Parenthood was founded 100 years ago with a very, very simple mission: to give women the chance to determine their own destiny. And we've been in the business of helping folks do that ever since, to live their best life, as we say, whatever that means to them. Because we believe that every person who walks through our doors has something to offer to the world. My friend Anna Quinlan put it perfectly. Every time we help a woman wearing a headscarf, or a nervous teenager, or a young gay man, or a working woman who feels overlooked by institutions, every time we open the door to a health center and greet them with warmth and treat them with dignity, we tell them this: that they are welcome, not only at Planned Parenthood, but in America. In America. So as the world keeps spinning forward, that's the future we're fighting for. Inspired by those who came before us with full knowledge of the enormity of the task ahead. 47 years ago, Hillary Clinton told her graduating class at Wellesley, "Fear is always with us, but we just don't have time for it. Not now." And she's right. We've got a lot of work to do and not a minute to waste, so let's get to it. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
There's a tendency for those of us on the left to align ourselves with single issues. I myself have been working for a single-payer healthcare system for a zillion years because I believe in healthcare as a human right. You've been working for women's health in many ways. This election has really kind of hit me with the realization of how important it is to start to build a broader movement and for all of us to work together. And so I'm wondering, partly for my own benefit and some ideas, I'm wondering how Planned Parenthood or you personally are reaching out to other groups to try to broaden your reach and to associate your work with other issues.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you for the question. And it's interesting. I didn't come out of the women's movement. I was a labor organizer for many years, and I kind of worked in every movement probably that is out there. And so I agree that we aren't single issue people, and we can't be single issue activists. And in fact, I just flew in from Washington, D.C., where we convened a number of progressive groups that really span the spectrum. And the exciting thing is that reproductive rights are at the table, along with labor, along with LGBT groups, or along with folks who are fighting for immigration rights. And I sort of see it the way I see our patients. We have 2.5 million patients every year, and their needs are intersectional and multidimensional. We have patients that are now scared about being deported as much as they are about being able to get birth control. They're scared about the violence in their community and the opportunities their children have based on their race or religion, just like they're concerned about getting access to cancer screening. And so I do believe that, I will say that I believe young people, this next generation understands in a more profound way perhaps than old-time organizers did, that all of these rights are connected. And that's what gives me hope. And I believe you'll see that, unfortunately, to be really honest, everyone's going to be under assault, I think, in these next few years. Anyone who's worked on civil rights or social justice issues or voting rights. And so it's going to be even more important that folks band together and stand with each other, because an assault on one is assault on all. But I believe that people understand that, and I'm gratified that people are acting and talking and standing up for each other in a way that we have to in these months to come.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I guess for those of us who don't just want to maintain for the next 4 years, who think that there are fights to, so for those of us who think that there are fights to win and progress to be made in the next 4 years, where do you think the best allocation of resources is? Obviously, we have an unfriendly Supreme Court, or soon to have an unfriendly Supreme Court, unfriendly federal legislature. A lot of state legislatures, especially in states that need it most, are going to be unfriendly. So where can we spend resources, both legal, financial, wherever, to make a difference and win some fights?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do think it's really important that as many defensive battles as we are going to be in, we have to always be playing offense. And that is, I just think that's going to be critical. And I think that's going to be at the state level. I mean, there are huge opportunities to make progress. And that's how, I mean, as an organizer, the way that people join up and be part of something is when you have a chance to win. I mean, no one wants to fight to lose. And so I do believe on a whole host of issues, whether it is state legislative issues, whether it is local school board issues, whether it's voting rights issues. We got to look. Half the people in this country did not vote in this election, and that's one of the reasons that we had the kind of outcome we did. And so those are battles that are going to be fought in the states. And I'll say I have seen some of the most exciting organizing happening in states. I don't know if anyone's from North Carolina. Love it. Our sole representative there from North Carolina. Thank you. It's been a really exciting time, and actually I believe the reason the new governor is going to be Roy Cooper, the Democrat, is because of the coalition of progressive groups who worked there, led by the NAACP, but including Planned Parenthood and including the broadest array of folks standing up for teachers, standing up for women's rights, standing up for voting rights. That's where I think the exciting organizing is going to happen, and I'm sure there's a lot of that going on in Illinois or wherever you come from. But you're right. I mean, what I think we have to demonstrate, and my friend, another group that I really like, Color of Change, Rashad Robinson, who's a friend of mine, we were talking about this the other day, is that, it's important now that in this time where I think folks can kind of look around and go, what in the world happened here? And really, in despair, it is really important that we put forth a vision and opportunity for people to make change, and that's how we're going to turn things around. So thanks for your enthusiasm. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Mrs. Richards. Thank you for coming to campus today. You mentioned abortion several times throughout your lecture tonight. So with that in mind, what is the intrinsic difference between a fetus or a baby one day before birth versus one day after birth?
Well, a fetus has not been born yet, so that's the most. And as a mother of three, I know a lot about this intimately. So I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to get at, but I will say this, and this is really important to me. I mentioned abortion because we haven't talked about it enough in this country. And for too many, for centuries, for decades, women in this country didn't even ever talk about it. It was a taboo topic. And I do believe to have the kind of political change and the future that we want, we have to have culture change in America. And that means being open and honest about issues of sex, of sexuality, of abortion, of birth control. These are issues that affect everybody's lives. If they haven't yet, they will affect your life at some point. And we have to bring out of the shadows issues of sexual assault and sexual harassment and make them say that we will not allow this in our country ever again. That to me is And I'll say this lastly, I've had an abortion, and I've told that story publicly, and I live a life of privilege where I can say things and people can hate on me and I don't really care. But I think it's important to recognize not every woman has that ability, has that privilege. But I can tell you, it's been meaningful to me, the number of women who have come up to me in airports or on the street and said, thank you for telling your story, and now I'd like to tell you mine. Because there has been so much shaming and public, stigma. And it's time we tell our stories openly and honestly, and we give every woman the dignity to make her own decisions, not only about her health care, but about her pregnancies. It's the most important and intimate decision most women will make in their lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I guess there's a lot of conflicting narratives going around. I mean, the statistics about women going out and getting IUDs and like those conversations that I had with a lot of friends on the day after the election and kind of the days since then. And I guess there's, perhaps this is a question, I guess my question is, I know that President Obama recently took action to protect Planned Parenthood, but because of how many stories are circulating and with regard to kind of where, I guess my question is where does that action stand and kind of what is the potential for kind of altering that action in the next 4 years?
Yeah, okay, great. Well, first of all, just because we're in Chicago, I just want to say it has been the honor of a lifetime to work with President Obama and his administration, and I think he will go down in history as one of the finest presidents ever in the history of the United States. And he has, against all odds, done extraordinary things, and he has been an incredible supporter of women's health care, of women's reproductive rights, and of Planned Parenthood. And of course, one of the proudest moments in my lifetime was the day he called me to say he was about to announce that all women in the United States of America were going to get access to birth control under the Affordable Care Act at no cost. 55 million women, saved $1.4 billion the very first year. It has changed women's lives, and it has been extraordinary. And my fear is the folks who got in now are going to try to erase all that. And can I just say one thing to you? You cannot let that happen, okay? You cannot let that happen. So some bad stuff is going to pass because, frankly, Donald Trump will be in the White House, and the Republicans control Congress. And Mike Pence, the incoming vice president, who never passed a single bill as a congressman, his entire obsession has been ending access to abortion and ending access to Planned Parenthood. So it's going to be tough, and despite all the good work of President Obama, it's going to be very tough the next several years. But we've been around 100 years, and we're going to be around 100 more. That's my pledge. That's my guarantee. So.
Thank you for your insight and expertise today. And I just want to
one second to say, I know I'm supposed to keep your time, so I think you will be the last question as much as you would love to continue.
Or someone else is standing up. We'll take whoever's still standing. Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully this is an easy one.
Okay.
And I'll try not to cry because 3 proud independent females that I'm sitting up there are all crying back there as you're like talking. So what can we do? What can I do? All these brilliant brains out here that are in law school can do their part. What can I do? I'm not a brilliant law student.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're going to need everybody on the field. This is, and I think one of the things that's going to happen is there are going to be things that people do in their individual ways, and we were talking about this earlier with some of the students. I just find the incredible acts of courage that people are standing up when people do hateful things to other people, or standing up for people who are different or who have been shamed. I think there are acts of personal resilience and courage that we're going to have to all take because we are better than this as a country. I really firmly believe that. And then, you don't have to be a lawyer to be in the fight. I'm not a lawyer. I'm probably the most uneducated person in this entire room, or undereducated maybe. I think the important thing is get involved and don't wait till the perfect thing comes along. And so, one of the things I found as an organizer is just that a lot of times you will be concerned about something, whether it's something happening on campus, an issue here, or something is happening in the city, and you'll start organizing and you'll realize that a lot of other people had the same concern, but they were just waiting for someone to take action. And so I think this is the time, if ever in your lifetime, not to hold back. And you'll make mistakes and you'll start some things and they won't work, but just keep going. This is a time when people have to stand up and be counted in America about what we believe in and what our values are. And so the crazy thing, as I said earlier, this is not the civil rights movement. Yes, it's not the suffrage movement, but it's about as close as we're ever going to see in our lifetime. It's a time to stand up for the kinds of morals and values that we have. And I hope that in whatever way you can find to do that, that you do, because we're counting on you.
Thank you, and I'm crying again. I'm crying again.
And then I think we have a couple seats. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. My question is about the attacks against Planned Parenthood and how most of those aren't rooted in facts and evidence. Even the word like post-truth has been kind of a buzzword given the election. So I was just wondering, how do you combat those attacks that are kind of rooted in anger if you can't combat them with like the facts and the evidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a much bigger problem than Planned Parenthood. I think we are living in a fact-free zone right now, and this election was clearly very dispiriting in that sense, that the facts didn't seem to matter. So I honestly don't know. And I know for us at Planned Parenthood, we just have to keep putting patients and the folks we serve at the center of our work and stand up for them. That's the most important thing that we can do, and then hope that the truth will out, as it usually does. Unfortunately, a lot of folks get hurt in the meantime. But I wish there were a simple answer to how to deal with, I think, an environment now in sort of where things are passed off as real that aren't. And even months later, as happened with us, when folks were indicted for the kinds of attacks they made on us, still a lot of damage is done in the meantime. So,
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, I think we'll end up.
Last question.
Last one? Yeah.
Hi, once again, thank you so much for being here. You mentioned intersectional issues, and I wanted to ask specifically about the queer and trans community in reproductive health. We're kind of seeing providers slowly start to realize not everyone who needs women's health is a woman, right?
That's right.
So what is the role of Planned Parenthood at a time when women's rights and women's dignity is under attack, but also when we are slowly starting to realize that there's a huge need for reproductive health for trans people?
Absolutely. And I mean, access to sexual health care and reproductive health care writ large is what's at issue. And believe me, the attacks that are going to be made on us are going to impact all kinds of communities. One of the things that has been so incredibly inspiring over the last, I'd say, 2 or 3 years are the states in which we've been able to open up trans services and the enormous outpouring of appreciation by patients. And it was, frankly, a reminder and an education for me of what it is like to go and feel like you can't go to a medical care professional, number one, who even knows how to provide your care, but number two, who can treat you with a kind of respect and dignity that you deserve. And that to me it is all connected. And I'm very hopeful that in the year or two ahead, that we're able to expand trans services all across the country. I know I was just in Asheville, North Carolina, where we just opened up services there, and folks were literally driving across state lines to get to Asheville, which was just a poignant reminder of the disservice that we have done collectively in serving folks who feel on the most margins of the healthcare system. So thank you for standing up and for asking about what I think is an incredibly important part of healthcare in America. And maybe since that is our last question, I'll hang around here down at the bottom, but I do think that I don't think healthcare access is a siloed issue. I think it actually is an issue that is so profoundly linked to your ability to live your life, and not just reproductive health care. And I do feel like we're facing a time now, and I've just seen some of the appointments that are being made by the incoming administration, folks who've been fighting against healthcare access their entire lifetimes, who now want to end Medicare, want to end Medicaid, want to end Title X, want to end the National Family Planning Program, which for God's sake was signed into law by Richard Nixon. It was a Republican program. We are really at a threshold point here in America about whether we believe, in fact, that all people are deserving of health care access regardless of their income or their geography or their race or ethnicity or their immigration status. This is a time to stand up and be heard. And maybe not for yourself, it may not impact you, but it is impacting millions of people across this country. And that's where the American people are. They didn't vote for Donald Trump to take away their health care access, to take away their rights. And so it's never been more important, I think, for us to stand up for those values. So thank you for having me. Thanks for being here today. I appreciate it.